It started on a two-lane road that most people don't even remember driving. Early spring in the Blue Ridge Mountains, just outside Asheville. The kind of evening where the light fades a little faster than you expect, and the chill sneaks in under your jacket. Pines on one side, a drop-off on the other, and a strip of asphalt cutting right through what used to be quiet bobcat country. In that fading light, he appeared. A young bobcat, later they would call him Copper, lay half on the shoulder, half on the rough edge of the pavement. His back legs were twisted and still. Only his front paws moved, clawing at the gravel one small pull at a time. He dragged his injured body forward, inch by inch, as if sheer stubbornness could carry him to safety. Headlights flashed over him, then were gone. A pickup slowed just for a second. The driver leaned over the wheel, eyes catching the small broken shape on the roadside. The truck hesitated, brake lights glowing red in the dusk, then released. The engine growled and the truck rolled on. Maybe he told himself it was too dangerous. Maybe he thought, it's just a wild animal. Nature will handle it. Car after car did the same. A glance, a flicker of curiosity, and then distance. If you've ever driven a road like that, you know the rhythm. Your mind is on dinner, on bills, on the long day you just finished. You don't expect to be the one faced with a life or death choice in the middle of nowhere. Most people keep going, not because they're cruel, but because they're afraid, or because they don't believe they're needed. And still, the little bobcat kept moving. Every scrape of his paws left a faint line in the dust. His sides heaved. His tail barely twitched. He couldn't see much beyond the glare of passing lights and the sting in his spine. But something in him pushed toward the sound of engines, toward the world of humans that had just hurt him, as if inside that world there might still be one person who would stop. This is where Ellen comes in. Her old sedan hummed along that same stretch of road, heater wheezing, dashboard throwing a soft orange glow over unopened envelopes stacked on the seat beside her. Insurance letters, a mortgage notice, a missed call from her daughter. She hadn't returned yet because she didn't want to worry the kids. She was tired. The kind of tired that isn't just in your bones, but in the quiet of your evenings. As she rounded the curve, her headlights swept over a shape on the shoulder. At first, she thought it was a torn tarp, maybe a dropped backpack. Then the tarp lifted its head. Two golden eyes flashed in her beams. She saw the front paws drag, the back half of the small bobcat trailing uselessly behind, and her foot came off the gas without her even thinking about it. She could have kept going. Everyone else had. But there's a moment in some lives when the road splits in two and no sign tells you which way to go. For Ellen, it was this. A wild bobcat, broken and begging in the only way he knew how. And the realization that, on this darkening mountain road, she was the only one who'd even slowed down. She pulled onto the gravel shoulder, heart pounding louder than the engine. Out there in the cold, a small life was hanging on by threads, dragging itself toward the light of a stranger's car. Inside that car sat a woman who had spent years feeling like the world had quietly moved on without her. Two kinds of loneliness are about to collide. In the next part, we'll stay with Ellen as she opens her door, hears the crunch of gravel under her shoes, and realizes that this bobcat isn't just hurt. He's trying to reach her. If you've ever had a moment when you knew you couldn't just drive past, stay with me. This is where true kindness begins. By the time Ellen stepped out of the car, the night had settled in enough that every sound felt sharper. A door creaked. The engine clicked softly as it cooled. And underneath it all, there was that faint, ragged sound again, the scrape of a tiny body against gravel. That's our mini hook here. One woman, one wild bobcat, and a stretch of road where everyone else had already decided to look away. Ellen stood for a second with her hand on the doorframe, letting her eyes adjust. The highway hummed in the distance, but this little pull-off felt strangely cut off from everything. Her headlights spread a pale cone of light over the shoulder, and there he was. The injured bobcat had managed to drag itself a few inches closer to the road. His front paws were splayed, claws hooked into the dirt like he was anchoring himself to the world. His back legs still lay twisted behind him, not moving at all. When Ellen took a cautious step forward, his ears twitched, but he didn't try to flee. He did something stranger. He tried to come toward her. It wasn't fast or dramatic. It was one small pull, then another, each one costing more than it gave. He slid rather than walked, leaving a faint track in the dust. His eyes never left her face. In the washed-out glow of the headlights, it looked like he was begging the only way a bobcat can beg. Not with words, but with the refusal to give up, as long as someone was there to see him. Part of Ellen wanted to run right to him, scoop him up like the house cats she'd loved years ago. Another part remembered every warning she'd ever heard. Don't touch wildlife, they're dangerous. Those cats are unpredictable. You're not as young as you used to be. You could get hurt. A car came around the curve just then, slow enough to notice her hazard lights. It rolled by, then eased to a stop a few yards ahead. The passenger window lowered halfway, the cold air carrying a stranger's voice. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be that close," a man called out. Bobcats can be real trouble, especially when they're hurt. Best to let nature take its course. Ellen nodded politely, but her eyes went back to the ground, to the way the wild bobcat's front paws scrabbled whenever she took even a step away. The car idled for a heartbeat. Then the window slid up. Taillights glowed red, then faded into the dark. Everyone else drove on. And here's a quiet truth. Most people don't ignore suffering because they don't care. They ignore it because they're scared, or they feel small, or they've been told 100 times that stepping in is not wise. They trust those voices more than they trust their own heart. Ellen took another step closer anyway. "Easy now," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I see you. I'm not going to run off." The bobcat's breathing hitched, then steadied. He didn't bare his teeth. He didn't lift a paw to strike. He just lay there, watching her, as if the whole weight of his small world rested on whether she stayed or turned around. For Ellen, this was the moment that shifted something deep inside. All the years of feeling like background in her own life. All the evenings spent in a quiet house with unopened mail and unanswered questions. Suddenly, on this cold shoulder of a forgotten road, she was the one person who mattered. A fresh way to look at it. Sometimes the universe doesn't ask you to fix everything. It just asks you not to walk away when you're the one who stopped. That's the small lesson tucked in this scene. You don't have to be strong or trained or fearless to show true kindness. You just have to stay when your whole body is telling you to leave. Ellen glanced back at her car, at the faint glow of her dashboard, then at the injured bobcat dragging his courage across the dirt to keep her in sight. When she finally moved, it wasn't to leave. It was to circle back to the trunk, fumbling for an old blanket, already thinking, there has to be a way to help him. In the next part, another set of headlights will pull in behind her, and a young man on a tight schedule will have to decide if he's willing to be late for the sake of one small life. If you've ever had a moment where your heart tugged you one way and the world told you to keep driving, stay with me. This is where that choice begins to change more than just one bobcat's story. The second set of headlights that night didn't belong to a rescuer or an animal control truck. They belonged to a tired delivery driver who thought he just stumbled on a stalled car. That's our mini hook here. One more ordinary person just doing his job, about to find out he's walked straight into someone else's life or death moment. The van rolled to a slow stop behind Ellen's car, hazard lights blinking in the dark. For a second she tensed, wondering if she was about to be told to move along. Instead, a young man stepped out, wearing a company jacket and holding a small package. "You all right, ma'am?" he called gently. "Saw your lights. Thought maybe you broke down." Ellen opened her mouth to answer, but the bobcat spoke first. It was barely more than a rasp, a shaky, broken sound from the ground beside her car. The injured bobcat tried to drag himself again, front paws digging into the gravel, trying to pull closer to the human shapes standing in the glow of the headlights. His back legs stayed limp, trailing behind him, but that didn't stop him from trying. The driver followed Ellen's gaze. When he saw Copper, he went very still. "Oh man," he breathed. What happened to him? Looks like he was hit, Ellen said. He's been dragging himself across the shoulder. I couldn't leave him. The explanation was simple, but the situation wasn't. Behind them, the van's dashboard glowed with route notifications. The young man, his name was Logan, pulled his phone from his pocket without thinking. On the screen, a list of stops, estimated arrival times, and a red warning for delay risk. He stared at it for a moment, thumb hovering. I'm supposed to be on the other side of town in 15 minutes, he muttered, half to himself. And this is where the real story asks its question. What happens when your schedule and your conscience pull in opposite directions? For Logan, it wasn't just about being late. Years earlier, his family dog had been hit by a car on a rainy day. He'd been at school when the call came. By the time he got to the clinic, the choice had already been made. They'd done what was necessary. He'd always wondered if things would have been different if someone had stopped sooner, stayed longer, pushed a little harder. He looked at Copper now, a wild bobcat, not a pet, and saw that same helpless fight in the way the animal clawed forward, trying to reach Ellen's shoes. Most folks would say this isn't our problem, he said quietly. Wild animal, mountain road, bad luck. Ellen didn't answer right away. She just knelt a little closer, fingers tightening on the folded blanket in her hands. Copper's eyes followed her, wide and frightened, but filled with that strange, stubborn hope again. Logan exhaled slowly. I can get in trouble for being late, he admitted, but I don't think I can drive away from this. He typed a quick message to his supervisor. Emergency on the road, will be delayed. No details, no excuses, just a small line in a long day that marked the moment his route stopped being about packages and started being about something heavier. He took off his jacket, laid it on the ground beside Copper, and helped Ellen slide it gently under the bobcat's body. They moved slowly, careful not to jolt his spine, talking to him the whole time in low, steady voices. Copper didn't lash out. He didn't try to bite. He simply surrendered his weight to the fabric and the hands holding him, eyes fixed on Ellen's face. Here's a quiet reflection. Sometimes kindness isn't dramatic. It's a young man deciding that one warning at work is worth it. It's a woman choosing to trust her instincts instead of a stranger's fears. It's two people from different generations kneeling on cold gravel beside a wild, broken cat, acting as if his little life matters just as much as any obligation waiting down the road. A fresh way to see it. Logan didn't stop being a delivery driver that night. He simply delivered something different. A second chance, shared between three living beings who might never have met if he'd stayed on schedule. The small lesson here is simple. You don't have to have the right uniform or the right title to be part of a rescue. You just have to be willing to step off the path you thought you were on, when someone else's path has completely fallen apart. With Copper wrapped in the jacket, they lifted him carefully, feeling his body sag between their hands. Ellen opened the van's back doors, and together they made space among the boxes for one small, breathing life. In the next part, we'll follow them to the edge of town, to a quiet clinic where hard truths, thin odds, and real education about bobcats and wildlife rescue are waiting. If you've ever watched a younger person choose compassion over convenience and felt a little hope because of it, stay with me. That's exactly what happens next. By the time they reached the little mountain clinic on the edge of town, the night felt heavier than when they'd left the road. That's our mini-hook here. A tired building with flickering lights, two strangers carrying an injured bobcat through the door, and the quiet question hanging over all of them. Is there really anything anyone can do? The parking lot was mostly empty. A single porch light buzzed over the entrance, casting a pale ring on the concrete. Ellen climbed out first, heart thudding, then turned as Logan lifted Copper from the back of the van, still wrapped in the jacket and blanket. The bobcat barely moved now, his head resting against the fabric, breath shallow but steady. Inside, the waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and dog shampoo. A woman at the front desk looked up, expecting another late-night pet emergency. Her eyes widened when she saw Copper. "You brought in a bobcat?" she whispered. "He was hit on the mountain road," Logan said. He dragged himself to the shoulder. We couldn't leave him. The explanation was simple, but the weight of it settled in the room. The receptionist picked up the phone with one hand and buzzed the back door with the other. A moment later, Dr. Naomi Fletcher stepped in. No dramatic entrance, just a calm presence and the kind of steady voice you only get after years of facing hard cases. She took one look at Copper and nodded toward a treatment room. "Let's get him under some lights," she said. "We'll see what we're dealing with." This is where the gentle education begins, wrapped inside the story instead of outside it. As she examined Copper, she spoke in a way that included Ellen and Logan rather than pushing them aside. She explained that bobcats are naturally shy, more likely to slip away into the trees than approach a road. They hunt at dawn and dusk, keep to themselves, and rarely choose to come near people unless something has gone very wrong. "More traffic up there now," she added quietly, fingers feeling along Copper's spine. "More houses, more speed. We're seeing more of these injuries every year. They don't understand the rules of the road. They only know the forest is shrinking." X-rays followed, the sharp click of the machine, the cold metal table, Copper lying so small under the heavy equipment. Ellen watched through the glass, hands clasped, feeling every second stretch. Logan stood beside her, phone buzzing with route alerts he ignored. When the images appeared on the screen, Dr. Fletcher didn't rush. She traced the lines of Copper's spine with a gloved finger. "Here," she said softly. "This is the problem." A break in the lumbar region. Vertebrae shifted, pressing where they shouldn't. Shadows that suggested deep bruising. "His back legs are paralyzed. He's lost most of the nerve function already." "Can you fix it?" Ellen asked. "We can try," the doctor replied. "Surgery to stabilize the spine, manage the internal damage. But..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "The chances of him ever walking normally again are very small. And there are risks. Infection, complications. He may not survive the procedure at all." This is the hard truth part. No soft edges, but no cruelty either. Just honesty, given with respect. Ellen swallowed. "What happens if you don't operate? He'll suffer," Dr. Fletcher said quietly. "And not for long." For a moment, the room seemed to shrink to just the three of them, and the small, injured bobcat between them. Then the doctor did something important. She stepped a little closer, not as a clinician, but as another human being carrying her own scars. "I've been doing this a long time," she said. "There are cases where I recommend letting an animal go because it's kinder. But this one dragged himself along that road until someone stopped. He held on long enough to be carried through this door. I've seen animals with that kind of fight surprise us." A soft reflection settles here. Sometimes what tips the scales isn't just technology or odds, but the simple fact that a living creature hasn't given up yet. A fresh perspective. For Ellen and Logan, this wasn't just about saving a bobcat. It was about deciding what kind of people they wanted to be when life put them in front of something broken and gave them a say in what happened next. The small lesson tucked inside this moment is this. Real kindness doesn't mean ignoring the facts. It means hearing all of them, the slim chances, the costs, the fears, and still asking, is there room here for hope? Ellen looked at Copper, at the faint rise and fall of his chest. "If there's any chance at all," she murmured, "I want you to try. I don't want his story to end on the side of that road." Logan nodded beside her. "We'll figure the rest out." In the next part, we'll sit with them through the long night outside the operating room. The beeping monitors, the moments when Copper's tiny chest goes still, and the quiet prayers that rise when you realize how much you suddenly care about a life you met only hours ago. If you've ever waited in a hallway, wondering which way the scales will tip, you'll recognize what comes next. Stay with me. They say hospitals feel different after midnight. Animal clinics do too. That's our quiet hook here, a closed waiting room, humming lights, and behind one door A team working on a tiny wild bobcat whose whole life now depends on whether his heart and spine can survive the night. Elle and Logan stood in the narrow hallway outside the operating room. The clinic had settled into that late-hour stillness where every sound seems louder than it really is. A vending machine hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a dog barked once in its sleep, then went silent again. Over everything, the soft beeping of monitors drifted through the cracked door. They'd said yes to surgery. Now there was nothing they could do but wait. Dr. Fletcher and her team moved around Copper with practiced focus. From the hallway, all Ellen and Logan could see were shapes and shadows, gloved hands, the glow of a monitor, the curve of Copper's small body on a metal table. His spotted bobcat coat looked even smaller under the harsh surgical light. Leland sat on a hard plastic chair, fingers wrapped around a styrofoam cup of coffee that had already gone cold. She didn't drink it. She just held it as it might steady her. She wasn't someone who used fancy words about faith. But as she watched that door, the familiar rhythm of an old habit crept in. Not a speech, not a bargain, just a quiet, steady line in her heart. If there's any way, let him stay. And if this is my chance to show up for someone who has nobody, don't let me walk away too soon. On the other side of the hall, Logan leaned against the wall, phone in his hand. The screen lit up with messages, late notices, route adjustments, and an email from his supervisor, marked urgent. He turned it face down on the chair. "I keep thinking about my dog," he said softly, not sure if Ellen wanted to talk. "They called me when it was already over. I didn't get to be there when they decided." Ellen looked up. "That stays with you," she said. "Still does," he replied. "Feels like tonight is, I don't know." A second chance to stand in the hallway instead of hearing about it later. Inside the OR, the monitor suddenly changed its rhythm. The beeping grew faster, then stuttered. Ellen shot to her feet. Through the small window, she saw Dr. Fletcher lean in sharply, give an instruction they couldn't hear. A tech adjusted something. Another nurse reached for a different syringe. Then, for a breath that felt much too long, Copper's chest didn't move at all. If you've ever waited on the other side of a door like that, you know exactly how those seconds feel. The entire world seems to shrink to the sound of a single machine, a single, fragile heartbeat. Ellen's hand went to her chest. Alex stopped breathing without realizing it. And then, the monitor steadied. One slow rise of Copper's ribcage, then another. The beeps found their rhythm again. Ellen sat back down carefully, eyes wet. "He's still fighting," she whispered. Here's a soft reflection the night offers. Sometimes the bravest thing a living being does is simply keep breathing when it would be easier to let go. No speeches, no drama, just one more breath, and then one more after that. A fresh way to see this whole night is that it's not just about one injured bobcat on a table. It's also about a woman who thought her most important days were behind her, and a young man who thought he was just a cog in a schedule. All three of them are proving something to themselves in this hallway. The small lesson tucked inside. Real courage rarely feels heroic in the moment. It feels like waiting. It feels like staying put when you're tired, anxious, unsure what tomorrow looks like. But you stay anyway. Hours later, Dr. Fletcher finally stepped into the hall, mask pulled down, lines of fatigue around her eyes. Copper had survived the surgery. His chances of ever using his back legs were still small, but he was alive. He'd held on. Ellen exhaled a breath she didn't know she was holding. Logan laughed once, softly, from pure relief. In the next part, we'll move into the slow daily work of recovery. The heat lamps. The first time Copper opens his eyes. The tiny victories in rehab that most people would miss, but that mean everything when you've seen how close a life came to end. If you've ever lived through a long night of not knowing and come out the other side, I hope you'll stay with me. The hardest part is never just the surgery. It's learning how to live with what comes after. Some stories don't turn on one big miracle. They turn on 100 small ones that most people would walk right past. That's our quiet hook here. A paralyzed young bobcat, a small mountain clinic, and a ladder of tiny victories that slowly, patiently, begin to look like a life. The days after surgery settled into a gentle rhythm. In the recovery ward, Copper lay curled on a padded bed under a red heat lamp, his spotted bobcat fur warming to a soft glow. Machines hummed low around him. Nurses moved in and out with the practiced kindness of people who've seen a lot of endings and still make room for beginnings. The first miracle didn't look like much. Copper opened his eyes. Not the foggy flicker of anesthesia wearing off, but a slow, steady blink that focused. His gaze drifted around the enclosure until it found Ellen sitting in the same chair she'd taken the night before. Her coat was draped over her back. A thermos of tea sat unopened on the table. When he saw her, his whiskers twitched just once. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered. "You made it." That's the clear explanation of this phase. Rehab isn't a straight line. It's a collection of moments like that. A head lifted for a few seconds. A bite of food taken after a full day of refusing. A wild heart deciding over and over not to give up. Under Dr. Fletcher's guidance, they started small. An assistant supported Copper's chest while his front legs rested on a folded towel. The first goal was simple. Help him remember that his body could still move. "Just a little push," Dr. Fletcher encouraged. "No heroics." For a long minute, nothing happened. Copper's paws stayed limp on the towel. His breathing came faster, eyes half closed as if he wasn't sure it was worth the effort. Then, slowly, he pressed down. His left paw trembled, claws just barely scratching at the fabric. His right paw followed, shaky and unsure. He held himself up for maybe 3 seconds before collapsing back onto the bed, exhausted. Ellen's hand flew to her mouth. "You did it," she whispered, as if talking to a child learning to stand. That's one example of how these moments worked. Not headline material, no dramatic music, just a few inches of motion that meant the world to the people watching. As days turned into weeks, the ladder of small victories got a little taller. The first time Copper purred, or as close as a young bobcat comes to purring, when Ellen spoke his name through the enclosure glass. The afternoon he surprised a nurse by eating from Ellen's hand, one slow bite at a time after refusing everyone else. A difficult day when he wouldn't try at all. He turned his head away, frustrated, tired of the pain. Instead of pushing him, Ellen simply sat on the floor, back against the wall, reading out loud from an old paperback, while he listened in silence. There's a soft reflection in all of this. Healing rarely looks impressive while it's happening. For Copper, it was muscles relearning how to hold weight. For Ellen, it was a lonely woman learning she could still be needed every single day. From a fresh perspective, you can see how the cost of compassion started to show up too. Ellen drove back and forth to the clinic until the miles blurred together. Gas wasn't cheap. The medications, the special food, the donations to the small wildlife rescue fund. It all added up. At home, she moved bills around on the table, postponing a repair on her leaky roof so she could cover Copper's antibiotics. Her back ached from those hard chairs, but she still chose that same seat by his enclosure every morning. The small lesson tucked inside this part of the story is simple. Love is often measured less in big gestures and more in repeated, ordinary choices. Turning the key in the car again, showing up again, believing in one more tiny step, even when you're not sure anyone will notice but you and a small, spotted patient. One afternoon, Dr. Fletcher brought in a lightweight training cart, a little frame with wheels and soft straps. It was a preview of what might be possible if Copper lived long enough and stayed strong enough. When they eased his hindquarters into it and steadied his front legs, he froze for a heartbeat. Then, very slowly, he took one awkward, rolling step forward. His cart bumped the side of the enclosure. He blinked, startled, then looked over at Ellen, as if to check whether this counted. "Oh, it counts," she laughed through tears. "It counts." In the next part, we'll step outside the clinic and into Ellen's world, where hard decisions wait. Sanctuaries with long waiting lists, neighbors with opinions, and the question she never thought she'd ask out loud. What would it take for him to come home with me? If you've ever watched someone you love fight their way back through the smallest of steps, you already know how holy those inches can feel. Stay with me. This is where the story starts. To ask not just can he live, but where and with whom. People love to think the story ends when the animal leaves the clinic. That holiest part of the journey is just beginning. In a small house that was never meant to hold a disabled bobcat, and an older woman learning what forever really means. Before any of that, there were boundaries. Dr. Fletcher walked Ellen through every step. Permits signed, inspections passed, clear rules about what it means to share your life with a wild bobcat. Copper couldn't be treated like a house cat. He needed a secure indoor enclosure. A sunroom with strong panels and locks, climbing branches, logs to scratch, and sand scents to investigate. No sleeping on the couch. No free roaming. Respect his instincts. Protect the neighborhood. Protect him from people who don't understand where the line is. Ellen listened to every word and reshaped her home around them. The old dining room table went to the thrift store. In its place, a sturdy pen along the wall, a ramp leading up to a platform by the window, runners on the floor so Copper's front paws wouldn't slip when he moved in his little cart, a gate in the hallway so he'd never end up near the front door by mistake. On her porch, a simple sign, "Wildlife under care, do not tap or tease." Her budget got tighter. A vacation fund became vet bills. A new roof became maybe next year. Her living room looked more like a small sanctuary than a retirement home. But when she opened those blinds in the morning and Copper lifted his head blinking into the light, it felt like the house had finally remembered what it was for. At first, the neighborhood wasn't sure what to make of it. One man across the street shook his head, muttering about that bobcat lady. A few folks drove by slower than usual, trying to catch a glimpse. Then a local paper ran a small piece about the rescue. A photo of Copper under his heat lamp, Ellen's hand resting nearby. Old towels and blankets started appearing on her porch. Someone left a bag of special grain-free food with a handwritten note. For Copper. "Thank you for stopping when others didn't." And then came the night that tested everything. A summer storm rolled in fast, wind rattling the branches behind the house. Thunder cracked close enough to shake the windows. Copper, already on edge from the pressure in the air, paced in his cart along the edge of his enclosure, ears flat, tail twitching hard. Just then, a curious neighbor stepped up onto the porch, leaned close to the screen to say hi. A flash of lightning lit the room. Copper spun, instincts taking over. He let out a raw bobcat snarl, lunged at the barrier, front paws hitting the wire with a thud. No one was hurt. The enclosure held exactly the way Dr. Fletcher had designed it. But the neighbor stumbled back, shaken. The next day, the whispers started. What if he gets out? Is she really strong enough to handle him? Maybe this was a mistake. Not long after, a second crisis hit, quieter but harder. Copper developed a urinary problem common in paralyzed animals. More pain, more medications, more midnight cleanups. One morning, standing in her kitchen with her back aching and another bill on the table, Ellen pressed her palms into the counter and whispered, "I don't know if I can keep doing this." Here's the soft reflection. We talk about rescue like it's a moment. For the people actually living it, it's a series of days like this, tired, unglamorous, full of doubt. A fresh perspective comes when Rachel arrives. Her daughter had heard about the newspaper article, seen photos, and finally driven up to see this bobcat for herself. She expected to find her mother overwhelmed. Instead, she found Copper lifting his head and chirping when Ellen walked into the room. She saw the way Ellen's whole face lit up when she adjusted his cart and coaxed him forward. They sat together on the sofa, listening to the rain, while Copper dozed on his platform. "He's a lot of work," Rachel admitted. "But you look more like yourself than I've seen in years." The small lesson here is this. Real commitment isn't proven by the first yes. It's proven when everything gets hard and you decide, eyes open, to say yes again. Ellen didn't pretend it was easy. She simply chose. Choose to reinforce the enclosure instead of giving up. Choose to learn new routines for Copper's health instead of resenting them. Chose to be the kind of person who stays, even when the neighborhood talks and her body complains. In the final part of this story, we'll step a little further down the road, into the season where Copper is no longer the injured bobcat from the news, but a quiet center of gravity in a small community, and where Ellen, Logan, and Rachel begin to understand how one act of kindness has changed more lives than they ever expected. If you've ever had a promise tested by real life and wondered if you could keep holding on, stay with me. The way this story settles might feel closer to your own heart than you think. Most stories like this fade from the headlines. The photo gets old, the comments slow down, and the world moves on. But inside one small house near the Blue Ridge, the story never really ended. That's our quiet hook here. What remains after the rescue is done, after the surgery scars have healed, after the wild bobcat is no longer the emergency and becomes part of the ordinary rhythm of a life. On most mornings now, Copper starts the day in the sunroom. The first light of North Carolina slips across his enclosure, turning his fur the color of warm pennies. He shifts in his cart, pushes himself to the window ledge, and watches the birds rise out of the trees. If you didn't know his history, you might just see a calm animal enjoying the view. But Ellen sees every inch he had to fight for. That's the simple explanation of where the story has settled. Not in the drama of the mountain road, but in the steady, quiet partnership between a woman, a wild bobcat who can't walk on his own, and the people whose lives got pulled into their orbit. You can see the change in small examples. Logan still stops by, often at the tail end of his route. He doesn't rush anymore. He plans a little extra time so he can wheel Copper out on the padded mat by the open door and let him breathe fresh air while they talk. They don't just talk about the accident or the rescue now. They talk about work, about how he finally told his boss he'd rather be late for a delivery than drive past someone in trouble. They talk about Ellen's garden and which birds Copper seems most interested in. Sometimes they just sit in comfortable silence. 3 lives that might never have met if one van hadn't stopped that night. The neighbors have changed too. The man who once muttered about that bobcat lady now brings over stacks of old newspapers so Copper can have new scents and sounds to explore. A woman down the street leaves a note in the mailbox. My husband and I lost our old dog this year. Watching you care for that wildcat helped me get out of bed on the worst mornings. Thank you. A local wildlife rescue group sometimes shares Copper's story when they talk to schools or church groups, using him as a living example of how a wild animal can heal and how careful, respectful human kindness can make that possible. Here's a soft reflection that sits quietly over all of it. Ellen didn't just give Copper a second chance. Copper handed one back to her. In caring for a creature who needed her every day, she discovered she wasn't done being useful or brave. The house that once felt too quiet now has a heartbeat at the center of it again. A fresh way to look at this is to ask, how many lives did that one decision on the roadside touch? A wild bobcat was saved from the shoulder of a cold road, a delivery driver who began to measure his days in more than stops and time windows. A daughter who saw her mother's strength in a new light. Neighbors are reminded that wild doesn't mean unworthy. That rescue work doesn't only happen in big organizations. It also happens in worn-out sedans and modest sunrooms. And somewhere far beyond that little town, people are watching this story on a screen, maybe feeling a small part of their own heart wake up again. So here's where it turns toward you for a moment. If you've ever felt like Copper, hurt, slowed down, dragging yourself through another day just hoping someone will notice, I hope you see how much your life can still mean when it's met with kindness. And if you've ever felt like Ellen, wondering if your best days of helping and healing are behind you, I hope her story reminds you that sometimes the most important work finds us when we least expect it, on an ordinary drive home. Before we close, I'd invite you to sit with a gentle question. When you picture that mountain road, who are you in this story right now? The one who's hurting? The one who finally stops? Or the one who chooses to stay when it gets hard? If this touched something in you, It would mean a lot if you'd tap the like button and subscribe, so you don't miss the next quiet, true-hearted story we share. And if you feel called to go a little further, you're welcome to use the Super Thanks or Donate option below to help support the rescue and healing of wild animals like Copper, the bobcats, and other small lives that are out there tonight, just waiting for one stranger who's willing to stop.